As a longtime FBI law enforcement official, how do you respond when you hear the president-elect essentially reject out of hand the CIA conclusion that there was hacking to interfere with the 2016 election?
Well, I don't think there was, actually. I mean, you got to define hacking. If you think of hacking as someone's going in through a network, through an internet-connected system, or through a back door, or because they made the equipment, they have a back door built in. If you mean that, that's one thing. But if you mean that they hacked into, say, John Podesta's emails, or they hacked into
to the DNC
emails, and then they decided to release those things to WikiLeaks, although WikiLeaks says that that's not the case. But that's really not hacking, although they would have hacked it to get the material.
Yes.
But we're talking about publicizing something that theoretically had a detriment on the election.
A cyber attack, the conclusion of the CIA and other agencies seems to be a cyber attack to undermine confidence in the election, perhaps to favor one candidate over another, and we know Trump would be that candidate.
I think from the standpoint of a cyber attack on voting systems, I think it's almost unanimous that did not take place.
Yeah.
The FBI says it didn't take place. The National Security Director says that didn't take place. Everybody I know said that didn't take place.
But the CIA is talking about the hacking of the DNC and potentially
the reality is all these things, the DNC, probably the RNC, all these individuals, operating in the plain domain, with stuff you buy in some electronics store to protect your system. You're not talking about government grade encryption.
Yeah.
So it's not the least bit surprising that multiple people, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Russians, individual people could hack into these databases. It happens every day. So, but the decision, the editorial decision made by whoever produced this material and put it out to WikiLeaks, that's a different question. And did it have an impact on the investigation? On the election? It might have, but if you back up off of that, those things that were released appear to be true. John Podesta and the Democratic National Committee did run operations. They did send people into the Trump campaigns. We know that in the person's own words. They did all these nasty things, these kind of dirty playing things, and then of course they lie about it. So where is the truth there? Where is the facts? And if they want to do these types of things, they have to understand that, they're not going to protect these systems that they're communicating on unless they're just the stupidest people that ever lived. Yeah. So, they brought it on themselves. They put a woman in as the presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton, who was extremely flawed, big time flawed. And an investigation early on, more than a year ago, was being conducted, and that was common knowledge. So they basically reaped what they sowed.
Harry Reid yesterday was very critical of James Comey, the director of the FBI, for not responding to this when it became public back in August. Reid says he sent a very pointed letter to Comey asking him to pursue this subject and never even heard back from him. Would that surprise you if Comey did not respond at that point?
It would surprise me that he didn't respond to the majority leader in the Senate. Put aside Harry Reid and his antics over the years, which are just incredible. They're front page type antics, but that would surprise me. Jim Comey, tough job, but I recommended him actually not to be the FBI director, but be the U.S. Attorney in New York. So I know Jim, had a high opinion of him. He wasn't up to the task in a lot of ways, in my view. And I feel sorry for him because he's in a tough situation. Put the Harry Reid thing aside. The whole notion of this investigation, that was talked about for in excess of a year. The Benghazi Committee and others in the New York Times published information about Hillary Clinton having, basically a standalone server in the basement of her home. And and she would connect to that to devices like a BlackBerry, all of which is totally unsecure. And as time would go, it shows that she had classified information. In fact, she had some of the highest secrets of the United States on this system. Okay, so I mean, for Jim Comey to stand up and tell the public for almost a year that they're having a massive investigation, he's got all these agents involved, and they're doing all this and they're doing all that, and then of course it was delayed when they were coming out with a decision. And you find out after his press conference, when he lays out the elements of numerous criminal activities and then says he's not going to recommend a prosecution, which is the domain of the Attorney General of the United States. That is not the domain of the FBI director. Yeah. He can make a recommendation, but the decision to prosecute or not prosecute is clearly the Attorney General of the United States. So because of the trip out in the tarmac in Arizona, where the Attorney General of the United States made the idiotic decision to meet with Bill Clinton, whose wife was under investigation, and quite frankly, so was he, for the Clinton administration, for the Clinton Foundation. And to have this meeting there, it was just the craziest thing in the world. So I'm guessing, I don't know for a fact, that they pushed that decision off on Jim Comey. Because they felt politically maybe she couldn't make the decision. But
just let's go back to July.
Yeah.
The day that Comey comes forward with the decision. What's your response?
I was flabbergasted, quite frankly. But we didn't know, the public didn't know, I didn't know. I had really no inside information throughout this whole experience, I can tell you that. I've gotten communicated by numerous former agents, but not people involved in the investigation themselves. In fact, I wouldn't talk to them if they called me, because I don't want to be a witness to any of that stuff. But to find out that at the beginning of this investigation, they did not impanel a grand jury, which meant they had no subpoena power, which meant they could not get search warrants. That never happens in major criminal investigations. This is the first investigation I ever heard of any moment where that is not. Those are the tools. You cannot have a thorough investigation without those tools. So for him to keep this going for over a year about this investigation, which he had to know at the very beginning was a hollow investigation and was never going anywhere. He had to know that President Obama would never approve of Hillary Clinton being indicted for anything, nor would therefore the Attorney General. So I don't know why this was perpetrated for the length of time it was. My view is he should have stood up, had a press conference, said, look, we need a grand jury to investigate this. And if you're not going to give me the grand jury to investigate it, I'm going to resign as the director of the FBI. That's what should have happened.
You've said it's not a real investigation. What, specifically, how do you define that?
The agents had no power to compel.
Yeah.
Did you ever wonder why they were like begging for the laptops and begging for the electronics and giving immunity so that they would turn something over? That is preposterous. Yeah. That never happens in a criminal investigation. So, if you're a police officer and you have no ability to compel anything, you can't get a search warrant. You're trying to solve some major case and you can't get any legal process to compel testimony, to get records. You cannot conduct an investigation.
Take me back a step. You were with the FBI for 28 years?
Yes.
During that time, from the 70s to the 90s, what kind of institution was the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
I think it was honest. It was straightforward. It told the truth. There may be a rare exception here and there when someone goes off the foundation. There's no entity in the world that's 100% in everything. But it was a very honest institution that was responsible for investigating over 300 federal statutes of the United States, from the Migratory Bird Act to espionage, and everything else in between. And people's lives were at risk in those investigations. Kidnappings, child pornography, white slave traffic, all these types of things, bank robberies, all these violent crimes, drugs, the RICO statute for major criminal organizations like La Cosa Nostra, the Mafia. That's what the FBI did. And I got up every morning feeling that I was doing something for the American citizens, and in some cases for the world. in some cases for our friends in Canada who we had many, many investigations with.
So how would this happen then? If it's not a real investigation, if it's compromised in the ways that you've suggested, why? How?
Well, it's baffling to me, quite frankly. It's baffling that Jim, who's a former Deputy Attorney General of the United States, a former U.S. Attorney in New York, a very bright guy, a very smart, ethical guy, would involve himself in this political charade. And you can't be the FBI director and involve yourself in political charades. Yes, you answer to the Attorney General, who answers to the President of the United States. And yes, you may get political pressure. But the FBI can never be seen as an agency that responds to political pressure and puts their investigations in areas for political reasons. Yeah. If that's the case, the FBI is finished.
How difficult, because of the timing, because of the election, because of who was being investigated, would this I guess I'm trying to have you look at it from the other point of view. How difficult for James Comey?
Oh, it's very difficult. Very, very difficult. I'm not saying it wasn't. It was a hugely difficult thing.
The election, former First Lady,
here's a candidate,
husband, former president.
Exactly. She's the First Lady. She's got her own Secret Service people. She's a big wig. She's got this huge enterprise that supports her. Yeah. She's got all these investigators and people that do backgrounds, and it's legend, the things that she's been involved in and how she's dealt with other things like the women that her husband was involved in. I mean, this goes on for decades and decades. Yeah. So yes, it's a big, big deal. And it's a Democrat, and the president's a Democrat, and the president appointed the Attorney General. The Attorney General was also appointed the U.S. Attorney by her husband. I mean, this is really a tight web and a very complicated thing. My response, and just my opinion, what he should have done is he should have stood up and said, look, you're either going to give me the ability to conduct an investigation, because I refuse to conduct a sham investigation or an investigation without the tools to come to some reality of what's going to happen. And if you're not going to do that for me, then I, as the director, am going to step down from this. That's what he should have done, in my personal view, because he was in a political trap and he fell into it. And now he's been dirtied by that trap. And I think some of his responses have been his attempt to sort of even the playing field, which just gets more complicated and more geometric.
The nexus here seems to be New York and the New York field office of the FBI and the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney. And if you look back, at one point in time, you were there, Louis Freeh was there, Jim Comey was there, Rudy Giuliani was there. Yeah. How far back does sort of the interest in and enmity with Bill Clinton go?
I've heard this. I've heard people opine about the fact that this was kind of something that the New York office was pushing. I don't believe that for a second. I mean, this investigation took place initially in the Washington field office, which is assigned the territory of Washington, D.C. That's where the investigation was. Had nothing to do with New York until later on, when Uma's husband,
Anthony Weiner,
and that whole laptop thing and this whole business of dealing with underage minors across state lines and all these things. And, yes, that was an investigation being conducted by the New York division, which they then found all this other information, supposedly, other than Anthony Weiner's activities, which on their own were hugely outrageous and criminal. And Comey then said, look, we're going to take a minute out and open this up again and take a look at it. We're talking about thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents. Yeah. And then what, 7, 8 days, 9 days later, whatever it exactly was, he said, well, we looked at this and there's nothing there. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing, I don't know how you could possibly review those documents in that amount of time. Yeah. So what yes, they have computers. Yes, you can do keyword searching. Yeah. Yes, you can put words in there and you can have the thing kind of like a money counter, give you the ones that have those words in them. But I mean, to thoroughly look into that. And by the way, what difference would it make? Jim Comey left on the table that day in July when he had his press conference And he laid out all the elements of things where, you know, she was lied, or she did this, or she did that. They left on the table the Espionage Act and the fact that she had multiple top secret code word documents on her private server. You know, back in the old days, if you disclosed that, you were shot. Even today, you go to Leavenworth, they left on the table perjury. They left on the table obstruction of justice, the destruction of records. The Congress of the United States sent a subpoena to her office, to her lawyer, and to her, asking for these documents to be maintained when they finally found them. And 2 or 3 weeks later, they destroyed all of them. That's a prima facie case of destruction of evidence, of obstruction of justice. Nothing ever happened with that charge. The Federal Records Act. There's a mandate to keep federal records because there's a sunshine law, you know, where people can then ask the government for certain records. The Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
Because she had a server, and these were not State Department, there were all kinds of Freedom of Information Act requests that were going in by Judicial Watch, by many, many agencies, newspapers, you know, broadcast companies, over and over again. And the answers would come back, no records. Well, there's no records because they were never put in the federal records. I mean, that's a violation of federal law too. So he left all these federal potential indictments on the table. So when you think about it, what could have been on Weiner's laptop that was more egregious than what was already left on the table?
Now, Michael Steinbach, the assistant director, has been quoted as saying that he supervised that investigation, the emails investigation, and that there were 25 agents working on it, and there was unanimity in the lack of prosecution. Do you believe that?
No, I don't believe that.
So he's lying.
I don't believe. I don't know if he's lying, but I don't believe that. I absolutely don't believe that. I mean, any agent's worth their salt. I mean, they understand federal law. They understand the federal rules of procedure. They understand what evidence is. They understand what the elements of these crimes are. And it was just laying out there, you know, numerous people, numerous learned judges, Rudy Giuliani, many other U.S. attorneys, Joe DeGeneva, people that have worked in this field forever. I mean, I'll put myself aside. You know, Judge McKay. I mean, all these people that are reputable said that, you know, basically there were these prima facie cases just laying all over the place without any additional investigation. And if you had additional information, if you compelled information, you know, you could easily go ahead and prosecute these cases, and the decision was not to do that.
You say you reject the nexus of New York as a factor here.
Well, it's not the initial factor. It's not the factor that, in my view, started this whole investigation. It was the fact that eventually it became common knowledge to the Benghazi Committee. The New York Times wrote a story, and many other publications a long time ago. I'm going back into like 2010, 2011. It was pretty much common knowledge that she was operating a regular exposed email system. And people knew it. People in the State Department knew it. The security directors in there were writing memos. You can't do this, you can't do that. And it continued and it continued.
Bill Clinton, of course, appointed Louis Freeh. Clearly, that connection was severed at some point. In his book, Mr. Freeh describes Bill Clinton as morally corrupt. How much of this had to do, to some degree, with Mark Rich and the pardon of Mark Rich by Bill Clinton?
I don't think it had anything to do with it. I mean, on its own face, the Mark Rich thing, Bill Clinton's presidency, the relationship with Louis Freeh. Louis Freeh turned in his White House pass. He sent it back, and he refused to go to the White House. He was so, you know, morally, you know, just outraged about it. I got to tell you also, I had young girls who are now older girls, 12 years old, 13 years old, and you'd be driving down the street in your car, going shopping or something, and you put on the radio, news radio, and you're hearing on there all about oral sex, and you have a 12-year-old ask you, Mommy, what's oral sex? I mean, it's the President of the United States. I mean, so these types of things are just so far outrageously outrageous.
Yeah.
that, but did that have anything to do with okay, let's get Hillary Clinton, let's find out what we can do to her, because we had a very low opinion, and we thought it was outrageous what President Clinton did with Mark Rich, with letting guidance technology be given to China. I mean, I could go on for an hour of the things that were not helpful to the United States and the United States security. But the answer is no, it had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the fact that she put a server, or had a server, in the basement of her house. Yeah. And she used that as her official communications device with devices that were not encrypted. That NSA, you cannot pass classified information over these networks, or you go to jail. Everyone goes to jail, except Hillary Clinton.
I'm a little confused about the motive here, because on one hand, in July, James Comey announces that he doesn't believe there's grounds to prosecute.
Which, by the way, I just thought was an outrageous conclusion.
Then in October, he's castigated by the other side for announcing that there are more emails virtually on the eve of the election, which people saw as a blatantly political, partisan act.
Well, you're right. And that's why I said to you, based on my experience in the government, which goes on for a long, long time, multiple decades, Jim Comey fell into this little spider web, this little syrupy, honey bear, sticky, political cabal by going along initially with taking the heat off of the Attorney General of the United States for the political decision. Yeah. That was her decision not to prosecute. That was her decision to look at the evidence presented, which, by the way, was pretty voluminous even without subpoenas or search warrants. If they had subpoenas or search warrants, it would have been voluminous cubed. Yeah. But to take her off the hook, and for the FBI director, which is a non-political position, say what you want. It's a 10-year term, but you cannot be a political hack. You cannot do things for political reasons. You can only do things for the rule of law and the elements. That's what you can do. So when he first said, we're not going to make this recommendation, he was in fact saying the government is not going to prosecute her. Yeah. He wasn't just saying, here's our recommendation, because 2 days before, the Attorney General said, I'll take whatever recommendation he made. Well, that Attorney General, she cannot delegate that to the FBI director. Yeah. I mean, that's just absolutely, totally improper. So that was the first thing where he got his hands a little stuck in the web and the mud. And, once you put a toe in there, it's hard to extricate yourself back.
Yeah. But if all of that is true, why then would he have come forward with just days to go until the election to announce there are more emails, which was very likely going to have an impact?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, and quite frankly, it's befuddling. Yeah. For the reasons I stated earlier to you, assuming whatever the agents in New York said were on these things, apparently you sampled a few things. You can't go through them without a search warrant, but you can certainly, as you're conducting the investigation, the criminal investigation on Weiner, and then you start seeing some things that have different headers on them or something, and then you bring this to the attention. I mean, what could he possibly think? Here's my point. What could possibly be in there that's any more horrendous than what he already didn't act on? Mm-hmm. Are there going to be 50 top secret documents in there? I mean, what else? I mean, you can't get any worse than what they already didn't prosecute on.
Right. What do you think this has done inside the FBI?
It's caused great turmoil. That's the message I get. It's caused a lot of disappointment. Yeah.
In his book, Louis Freeh describes the atmosphere in the New York field office as being like a brotherhood.
Without question, it was. I mean, any organization that functions well and has good leadership is like a brotherhood. The Marine Corps is a brotherhood. Yeah. Whether you're a black youth from Harlem, or you're a Mexican from Texas, or you went to Dartmouth University or whatever, and you're in a platoon in combat, you're all brothers.
Yeah.
And the FBI may not be that dramatic, but from time to time it gets dramatic. But
Yeah.
that's exactly how I always felt about my relationships in the FBI.
Yeah.
Always. And that's because you have to have a sense that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to tell the young agents, I was the head of the office, thousands of people. And these young agents would come into the office we never used to send young agents to New York, but the last few years that I was there, we did. And their average age, like 27 years old, they average master's degrees, law degrees, CPAs, very, very established people. And they'd all be sitting here in this auditorium, maybe 50 at a time or something. And I would address them, and of course they're expecting me to tell them something because they get a set of credentials now and a gun, and they're in New York City.
That's right.
And they're going to be on a squad. And I felt the same way, even coming from the Marine Corps. It's a big responsibility. Yeah. And I would say to them, look, I take for granted that you're smart, you're honest, you're principled, you understand the federal law, you've just come to school, through school, and you understand constitutional law. You understand the rules of federal procedure. You understand all this works. That's a granted. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to tell you any of that. I'm going to tell you two things that'll measure your success for the United States, for the FBI, and for yourselves. Always tell the truth. Always. Yeah. Don't try to jury rig some solution. If you can't solve the case by yourself, we'll put other agents in it. If you can't do it with 5, we'll put in 10. If you can't do it with 10, we'll put in 100. But we will not cut corners. Yeah. Somewhere down the road, you're going to testify before a federal judge as to your activities on this particular day. And your activities need to be 100% honest. Number 2, everyone you come in contact with. Now, depending on where you're going to be working right now for the next year, that could be the chairman of Morgan Guarantee Bank, or that could be some drug-addicted, low-life person, who's conducting criminality or has done heinous things. You treat everyone you come in contact with the dignity and respect that they deserve. Yeah. And you do these two things and you will be a successful agent, successful person. And I believe everything I just said to you. That is exactly what these agents have to be. We never wanted to hire people that like to kick in doors. You don't want them in law enforcement at any level. But we may have to kick in doors, so you need to be able to do it if you have to do it. Yeah. But you have to basically, the power of the Bureau, the power of the RCMP, the power of any police organization is what the public actually thinks about them. Yeah. And can they depend on them for truthfulness and doing the right thing?
And when you've got an organization where that's the ethic, and it is like a brotherhood in some ways, and something like this happens, this election and how the FBI's been cast in it, does it make it all the more incomprehensible to the people inside?
I think it's very tough. The ex-agents feel very emotional about this. I've talked to hundreds of them. And I get hundreds of emails from across the United States because, the course of time being in the largest field office, worked with literally thousands of people. Yeah. And they feel very strong about it. And a lot of them have agents that are on the job now. And, they get all that feedback. And they're very disgusted about the whole thing. And they feel sorry for Jim because they don't think he's a corrupt person. And I don't think he's a corrupt person. I just think a moment in time, and this is big time. You're working for the President of the United States. This is a big deal. This isn't some small little thing where, the decision isn't that important. But at the moment in time, in my view, he just wasn't up for making the right decision for the agency. He maybe was thinking when he was the Deputy Attorney General, maybe he was thinking he's still the Deputy Attorney General. He was the FBI Director. And the FBI Director cannot condone political shenanigans. It just can't.
Yeah.